Welcome again to our series that we call Conscious Aging. With me, I'm Mark Davenport, with the real motivator and partner behind our efforts, Heidi Hermline. Say hi.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, and please say a few words to people about how they can get the best use out of this presentation.
We are streaming on our website, thewisdomfactory.net /live-streaming, and you will be directed to the site, to the page of our guest, where you can add your comments, because if you watch on YouTube, there are no comments possible at the moment, no live chat on, and we won't monitor it. So if you want to participate live, please come over and click on that. Or if you want it in red.
Oh, wow. Okay. Perfect. All right. Thank you. And now we come to the reason we're here tonight. Our guest, Alice MacGillivray. She's a PhD. She's from the community of Gabriola, just off Vancouver Island in British Columbia. I just looked that up a few minutes ago. Yeah. But Alice, before we say any more about you, to our viewers, just say hello.
Well, hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope you enjoy the series and the show, and I'm looking forward to the next hour.
Okay, wonderful.
It's good. And we have as a title today, it's a very unusual title, I think, Horses as Catalyst for Healthy Aging.
Yeah. Alice had talked to us today about a dream she's had since childhood, a dream which can also tell us something about how we might dramatically change our path in later life. And as you might guess from the title, it has something to do with horses. So, Alice, could you tell us more about that? And of course, anything else you might like us to know,
Well, sure.
Our viewers to know.
I mean, I think everybody who's joining this call or listening to the recording later or involved with the two of you is interested in aging, you know, because we've got this whole new generation, essentially, of people who have longer lives and potentially very healthy lives. And that hasn't been my main focus in my research, but I, as you mentioned, have been very interested in horses. I was one of those horse crazy kids and teenagers, like so many girls are. I think some boys as well, but it seems to be largely a girl thing. And I grew up in a place where I occasionally saw horses, but didn't have any opportunities to own one or work with them. So as you mentioned, I had this lifelong dream that I had to set aside. I think so many women, you know, have careers and children and families and other priorities, and they kind of push their own interests aside for a while in their lives. I've heard that story quite often. So there I was in my 50s thinking, gee, am I actually going to do this? Am I going to be able to have a horse or spend more time with horses? So a quick version of the story is I did take the plunge in my late 50s. I do have a horse. I'm really happy with that decision. Thank heavens I didn't know about all the learning curves I would be going through, because it's enormous. But today I'm not expecting everyone on the call is involved with horses or even wants to get a horse. But through these last few years of being very, very involved with horses, I found there are so many benefits to health, to well-being, to fitness, to relaxation, to learning. And I've started to explore that and research it a bit in terms of healthy aging. So that's the quick overview of why I love what you're doing and why I joined you today.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've taken a very roundabout way to get back to horses. You've been busy in the meantime, obviously. Can you tell us a little about what happened before you got back to horses, shall we say?
Oh, sure. I grew up in Ontario, Canada, Southern Ontario, Canada, which probably most people know, but not too far from Toronto. You know, I loved animals from the time I was little. I would, you know, for example, the next door neighbors had a dog that had been abused. And as a little kid, I would just, you know, sit 10 feet from the fence and wait and, you know, over weeks get to the point where the dog would trust me enough that I could go and pet her. And that was the kind of kid I was. So, of course, I wanted to be a vet. And back then, this is showing my age, but we're in good company. They said women couldn't be vets, you know, especially large animal vets, which interested me. Of course, now I think you could probably say most vets are women. But so I just tried to find ways to stay involved with animals. I became a dog groomer. I had pets. But in my career, most of the years that I worked were in the public service and with parks, because then at least I could be involved with wildlife protection, communicating with audiences about science and ecosystems and so forth. And then I ended up going back to school over and over again because I wanted to know more. I wanted to be better at what I did. So as you mentioned, I ended up eventually getting a PhD, not in sciences, but in part of the PhD had to do with leadership and learning. And those things, surprisingly to me at least, have been really important in working with a horse. You know, being open to all kinds of learning, revisiting your assumptions, revisiting your perspectives, and leadership is a huge thing with prey animals. It's really different than when you have a dog, because a horse will not be really comfortable if they don't see you as a leader. Otherwise, they have to be watching for all the nasty things that might come out of the bush. So, you know, I revisited my thinking about leadership too in the process.
Very interesting. No, they're not dogs or cats, that's for sure. And I don't think many people understand what a difference that may make in the, you know, the very basic makeup of the animal. You have to become the leader. Huh?
Yes.
I know our dog would gladly lead us around and had no problem at all being in charge.
In fact, she was at the beginning.
What do you mean?
We had a dog educator and she educated us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it was interesting for me. One of the people who ended up reviewing my book is a neurosurgeon, and he teaches you know, about neuroscience to various audiences, including surgeons. And he's quite interested in the hemispheres of the brain. I know some people diminish that and say, well, they're connected in humans and it's not a big deal. But he thinks it is a big deal, and that humans and dogs and predators in general are quite left-brained. We strategize a lot. We figure out how to do things and we collaborate. And with a dog, often you're sharing that leadership moment to moment back and forth, and it's fairly comfortable. They know you're the boss, but it might be negotiated when you're out on a walk or whatever, right? And he talks about how different it is with horses, that they're very right-brained, very much in the moment, very much aware. Like I think I said in the book at one point that if horses wrote the IQ tests, we'd come out as idiots, because they are so tuned in to even your heartbeat. You know, you can pretend not to be nervous and they'll pick up that you're nervous because your heart's racing, and they'll watch every hint of body language, and they'll be super aware of what's going on, what sounds are there. They'll hear things way before you do. So you have to slow down. I mean, for coming back to the aging topic, I think that's a really important thing, to just set aside the busyness of our minds and take a deep breath. And, you know, it's almost meditative to be with a horse relaxing together. You can start to breathe in sync. You can start to just slow down and connect in really powerful ways. Whereas a dog might be, oh, great, we're going for a walk. You know, who needs to connect? This is fun. You know?
This makes me think about, because I always have feared the heights of horses, and I actually never went on that. But when you say that, does it mean also that you just be with a horse without even going on top of it? Is it already?
Yeah. Very much. And that's something I think a lot of horse people miss. There's a lovely video, and I won't say the name of it now because I'll probably get it wrong, but it's a video about an hour long that I watched when I was doing some research. And the woman had been, and this is her story, but it's not an unusual story. She'd been a good rider, a good horsewoman, had accomplished things, taught people things, won prizes. But she just realized something was missing. And so she traveled around the country, maybe more than the country, I don't recall, interviewing people who were of the horse whisperer kind of school. Probably everybody's heard that term. People who communicate well, maybe train horses without tough techniques. And she came back just changed and full of ideas. But there's this lovely scene that's just emblazoned in my mind of her sitting down near her horse trying to do this. Okay, now we're going to have this relationship. We're moving on to a new phase in our relationship, and the horse is like, yeah, right. It doesn't happen instantly, but that's later I was hoping to talk about things like ways of getting involved volunteering, maybe at rescue centers and things like that. There are many ways to be with horses, benefit from being with horses, learn from being with horses without riding them, without owning them. And and there's a whole school of thought and practice that's often called liberty work, which it has that name because you don't have ropes or harnesses or saddles or halters or things like that. The horse is at liberty. They can choose to be with you or not. And so that's an amazing way to build up a relationship, is to just gradually increase the communication. And if that horse wants to do stuff with you, then it's really fun, and if they say, oh, I'm bored with this, that's fine.
Isn't that also that then with the relationship you create with the horse, or you don't, you have a sort of feedback on your ability tuning into another being?
Oh, very, very much so. Absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits or changes from the experiences that many of us had in our careers. We learn things, we get good at things, we do things, but how often do we really check in to see how well we're doing and how effective we're being? And it's easy to sound professional and have people nod, and you might just be getting compliance. There might be somebody there who's saying, what a silly person this is, or I can't believe that, but with a horse, they don't know how to lie. They can be sneaky, but they don't know how to lie.
Exactly. And this is the nice thing with animals altogether,
How can they be sneaky?
Sneaky. Well, I'll tell you one story that I heard from a woman. I've got about 20 in my mind, and one from my own experience. The one from the woman, she boarded her horse at a place where they did all the work. They did the feeding and manure cleaning and all that stuff. And she would go and ride, and her horse was getting hotter and hotter, more excited, more difficult to ride, more tense. And she couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. And she kept checking with the owners, and, she was getting the same food, and, it didn't seem there was any reason for this. And then one day the fellow who was managing the farm looked out and was watching the horses, and this horse happened to be in an area outside with access to, I think it was 7 other horses' paddocks. There were these sort of metal fence things between them. And the worker out there put the buckets of grain and supplements and stuff into the horses' paddocks. And then, quick as a wink, this one that the woman owned went around to every bucket and pulled it under the fence, like the one after another, not, oh, munch, 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 just like pull, 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 until all of them were in his field. I think it was a he, and gobbled them up. Well, of course, the horse was getting hot. It was getting all these calories and energy. It's like a kid in a candy store. Mine hasn't done anything that dramatic, but the one I always chuckle at, because it took me about 4 times to figure it out. We were out on a trail, and the trails where I ride, I've got a picture I could pull up later if you want, but the trails where I ride are sort of single car width, but they're dirt, they're not for cars, and they have lots of ferns around them. In the Pacific Northwest or Western Canada here, we have temperate rainforest. So huge trees and then ferns. And there's the odd little tiny patch of grass and then the dirt trails. So I was riding along, loose rein. We just like to relax when we're on trails. And, I don't know if I should, but I sort of let her go wherever she wants to on the trail. She wants to be over on the right side, fine. She wants to avoid the puddle. Unless we're doing puddle practice, that's fine. So she just kind of gradually heads over to the right side of the trail, and then all of a sudden a fly bites her knee. So her head shoots down and chew on her knee. And then she happens to be beside a little patch of grass, which she grabs some of because she's not allowed to eat, right? So I think it was 2 or 3 times I thought, oh, isn't that a funny coincidence? And then I realized she's doing it absolutely intentionally. I'd start to watch ahead, and there'd be a patch of grass 50 yards ahead. And sure enough, she'd just gradually move over to that side of the trail. And I'd tighten up the reins like, So, some people say horses don't strategize, and they don't strategize the way a dog does, but they have their moments.
They have their moments.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they have more intelligence than we have been used to crediting them with.
Oh, yeah, I believe so. And those of us with horses really chuckle when we see these experiments that are done by scientists. So, wow, they can learn to push the button with the square image to get a treat, or they can push the button they want their blanket taken off now that it's gotten warmer. Wow, we didn't know that. Or and I forget the psychological term, but there's a skill that involves sort of encouraging others to do what you want. Like, if you were my horse and there was something over to my right that, you wanted, you might be going, see that over there? Well, can you fix it? That thing over there, I want it filled with water, please, like right now. So yes, they, who knows what they're capable of, but certainly they have extraordinarily developed senses of the present, senses of how to get home, how to get out of a situation where you're lost. So yeah, definitely.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, I'm pleased to know that they're bright. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I would like to ask you, what exactly, I've already said that, what exactly would be the benefit for an older person? Yeah, where does old begin, or older?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say over 50 or over 60, to the first time in their lives to come or get near a horse and try to get into a relationship and maybe even go on top. I mean, I ask it also because I don't know. I like animals, but for horses, always, I had once a big donkey, and I was up there once, but down immediately. So,
well, there, and again, if you want later, I can bring out a couple of slides with bullet points about things like fitness and so forth. But I think it's quite individual, and I think it depends on your interests and what you want to do. I'll give you a couple of examples. There are now lots of workshops that are being developed. I don't know if they have them in Europe, but I'm sure they would, that have to do with people learning about themselves from horses. And sometimes these workshops are for the general public. Sometimes they're for particular audiences, like, people who've been abused as children, or people who have PTSD from military service or whatever. And and some horses have an uncanny ability to just single out, as some cats or dogs do too, who needs them, you know, and what that might look like. And so, you know, going to a workshop, something like that, could not only perhaps help you with, you know, anxieties or interests or things that you're wanting to pursue or learning about or getting more comfortable around horses, but you know, could also just give you a bit of a sense of, was this interesting? Is it something I'd like to do a bit more of? The same thing might happen volunteering at a rescue organization, but the reason I mentioned the workshops first is they are geared to people and helping people, whereas the rescue organizations are geared to horses and helping horses. And so they probably assume a little bit more confidence or skill or something than the workshops do. But there are so many. I mean, I read a study the other day. This doesn't answer your question specifically, Heidi, but it was a scientific experiment about very elderly people who were in geriatric hospitals and about helping them with things like balance and flexibility. And this particular study had a horse riding simulator, which I've never seen, but apparently it feels very much like being on a horse, walking on a horse, and exercise balls that were designed for this study. And they found that both increased the kinds of physical strength and flexibility things they were looking for, but that the horse riding simulator was better than the ball in some respects. So, you know, there've been more and more studies like this showing that, you know, fitness, flexibility, you know, when I have a trick back that acts up once in a while, and if it's a bit sore, you know, but I'm well enough to go riding, almost always going out for a long, you know, at a walk for my horse, I feel it just kind of clunk and everything's good again, and it's like a free trip to the chiropractor.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah.
So you have brought a presentation, and I wonder if you would present that a little bit, so we have an overview, and then afterwards we can also post it in our website under the event.
Of course. And, you know, I didn't necessarily intend it as something to work through all the way, but if there are, you know, questions or comments that come up as you go along, please jump in and ask.
Okay.
Notice the leather-like background here. So, you know, what I wanted to say here is that community is so important, and I think this is also part of the healthy aging theme. Way before I got my horse, there were some online tools, not the same as the ones that are around now, but there were groups of people who'd get together on listservs. There were websites like this one for breeders of horses, and I spent way too much time online. I'm kind of joking about that. It was good, actually. Trying to learn whether I was even capable and ready and had the resources to get a horse. So in the process, I discovered a whole lot, including, as it turns out, this was the farm where I bought my horse. And I just happened to do this screen capture the other day when there's a picture of me in the bottom right there when I knew almost nothing about riding.
We don't see it.
Only the title, Horses as Catalysts, we see.
So I wonder why.
Some down a little bit.
Well, I'm wondering if we're even on, you're seeing the same slide as I am.
I'm seeing Horses as Catalysts for Healthy Aging, the title.
Oh, okay. So it's not advancing. I don't know why it's not advancing.
Oh, I'm sorry for that.
I wonder.
Go down on your, yeah, here.
There we go.
Are you seeing it? Okay.
Nice.
So if I
learning.
Okay, fabulous. We'll do it this way. It's not showing the it's not in PowerPoint this way, but that's fine. So there I am, sort of like a sack of potatoes in the saddle there in the lower right.
No, actually, on the lower right, yeah, I see that.
Yep. but back when I was first learning, I was just going to these sites, communicating with people in listservs and comments, and community continues to be so important for ongoing learning and connection and activities and fun. So that of course spills over into other other parts of your life as well. So I also heard so many stories when I started connecting with these communities, and there's a couple in Ontario by the name of Pat Wolf and Jane Beale, and I knew their names, I knew their horses' names, I knew what their farm was like just from spending time on their site, and I always loved this picture. Are you able to see it, the one with the broken wagon? Just loved this picture because the horse is just standing there like, what the heck, And the picture isn't technically super crisp, but I wanted it in my book, so I got in touch with Pat for the first time, and we've since corresponded, and with Jane as well. But apparently, this cart broke, and the horse just stood there, and he ran into the house to get a camera to come out and take a picture of it, which says something about the breed too. This was his first horse and first Norwegian fjord, but they can be very tolerant of beginner mistakes. I interviewed and surveyed a whole lot of women over 40 who were involved with horses. Some of them since childhood, and some of them got their horses, around the same time I did. And I asked them, what would you miss if you didn't have horses anymore? And the number one thing that came up, which surprised me, was connection with nature. So that in itself, I mean, we know nature can be healing. We know it can help people lower blood pressure, and the fitness benefits of being out even for a stroll in the woods. The Japanese idea of forest bathing, soaking in the chemicals of the forest for health. So this was really cool to me. And this is a picture of me on my first, well, it's not of me, but by me on my first trail ride on my mare. And that's the view you get when you're going through the forest.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. It's much higher than when you
Yeah, they are big. It's a serious consideration. So I apologize for the little numbers up here, but it's the only way you can see the slides. So this is a recent study, double-blind, scientific study, following women in over 40 in different age groups. And we can't, of course, say it's cause and effect, but they found that the horsey women, which they characterized as having owned horses for at least 5 years, were living longer. And the highest discrepancy was in the 65 to 75 age range, where there was a 40-year difference. So there may have been many different things at play, but that's that raises so many interesting questions. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that some of those women are active riders and some aren't. They're maybe doing exercise, feeding or cleaning up around the barn, but maybe they're not out there riding. But some of them are. This woman is in her 90s. She is still riding. This was taken in 2011, but I looked her up on the web the other day and saw a picture of her in a lesson a couple of months ago. And she discovered that there's a thing called the Century Club ride, where if you and your horse's age over 100, you can do it. So she's been on 2 of these Century Club rides now. And I mean, doesn't she look good for 90-something?
Absolutely.
Yep. So's a horse. Yes.
Yes. Another thing, I have heard this kind of a sentence so often from friends in person, from the interviews I did. It's not always these exact words, but the idea that horses are therapy. That it's a way of getting away from other things in your life that might not be ideal, or might be more stressful or busier or whatever. And that there's definitely a therapeutic element, even casually using that. Maybe I should have a small T on therapy there. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you know, there are formal therapy things too. Like this is a mini horse that's a therapy horse. That's the horse's job. And sometimes horses go into seniors' homes. Sometimes they work with people with PTSD or other problems. And yeah, so probably everybody's familiar with mini horses. They look just like horses. This is a full-grown horse, but they're just very small.
I didn't know that they exist so small.
Yeah, they're
not ponies.
They're not. No, they're not pony. I mean, ponies is a funny word too. You can argue about everything in the horse world, but ponies technically just means lower than a certain height. But many horse owners and breeders make a big deal out of the fact that these aren't ponies. They have, you know, they're much sort of slimmer, more traditionally horse-shaped than the ponies are often kind of primitive-looking, chunkier horses. So, and minis are used quite a bit in therapy. And then, of course, there's the whole therapeutic riding network. And sometimes this can be for seniors. Sometimes it can be for people with conditions or difficulties like, you know, muscular dystrophy or people on the autism spectrum. And this is an adult with sidewalkers here at the Cowichan Therapeutic Riding Association that's on Vancouver Island. That lovely place, lovely people. And I tried to get another photo for this, a friend of mine, but he wasn't able to get it quickly enough.
Oh,
Where are you?
what happened?
She's gone.
Are you gone?
Ooh, Bernice.
Come back.
Something happened. We don't hear her anymore. We don't see her. Maybe she pressed the wrong button.
Uh-huh.
That can be. But she's still in the room.
Yeah. Well, we can get her back, I imagine.
I hope so. So in the meantime, we can talk a little bit about that. What is your impression? Would you try to go on a horse or to
Well,
have
I have ridden horses from time to time. Years.
Oh, you did?
I just gentle bridle course. People who have horses that are used to strangers being on them, strangers who didn't know anything on them, and I always enjoyed that. Though I never had to do anything to terribly, control the horse. Of course, the horse just knew where to go. Yeah.
This is practical if
Yeah,
the horse
right.
knows where to go.
Yeah, the horse knew the gig, so to speak. Yeah, but once I was following my daughter Lillian, who was quite small at the time, probably 8, 9, and her horse just stopped, wouldn't go anywhere, and it was in front of me, So what was I going to do? So I had no idea, but I just got off and walked to the front of the horse and looked at it, tried make myself a little taller than this horse. And I said, let's go, Oh,
Really?
yeah, yeah. I guess convinced the horse that I was in charge or something. And so we continued with our walk.
It's really funny.
Or there may have been some other reason why I decided to go. I have no idea.
So,
Are
she
you
back?
able?
Oh, good. You are back.
Well,
Yeah.
I wasn't hearing you for a while, and now are you hearing me?
Yes.
We are hearing you. You were disappeared,
Oh,
and we talked about his experience with horses.
Great.
So.
Great. So I don't know if I should try the screen sharing again or not then.
Not because it seems to be a bug there. We will publish it on the website. So
Okay,
you
great.
can tell us what there is, because there was one slide and there was written an excerpt of the book, and I think at this point you should talk a little bit about your book.
The book. It's time. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry that the screen didn't work out, but as you say, you can post it. the book was a surprise. There have been many surprises for me in this journey, and at one point I was injured, and it was interesting because as I started to work on the book, I didn't really want to talk about that, and I had this great editor who said, "Oh, you've got to talk about that." So I did a bit, but the book would not have happened if I hadn't had this surprise injury, which, Heidi, you made the point that these are big animals and there are risks, and I've never met someone with a horse who has decided not to have a horse because they've been injured. I'm sure those people exist, but I find it very interesting that everybody just seems to work through it and take it as part of the learning. So anyway, to make a long story short, I couldn't ride or work with my horse for quite a while. And I had several friends saying to me, "Why don't you do a book? Like, write a book. You've learned so much." And I thought, well, that's a silly idea, because there are fabulous books out there on all kinds of topics. Any topic you can think of, there's a good book out there. And then I realized that maybe there was a niche, because I'm very interested in adult learning. I've studied that quite a bit. I'm interested in leadership, as I mentioned. And there I was at almost 60 getting my first horse, and not wanting to be a competitive rider, not having had the childhood skill development that a lot of people have. And I'd already learned that there are, hundreds, thousands of people like me who got started late in life. So that was the book I wrote, which is, I think people on this call will recognize the inspiration for the title. It's called Riding Horseback in Purple, going to the, when I'm an old woman, I shall wear purple poem. And it's an exploration of, I guess the best way I can describe it is, in my research, just for me and for my community and possibly for the book, I learned that there are all kinds of mismatches. A lot of women have that dream that I described of wanting to be around horses, wanting to have a horse, and they don't prepare for that decision well when they're, 45 or 55 or 65 and getting their first horse. So I thought that was just tragic, because it can be such an amazing experience. It can be fabulous for health and wellness and growth and learning and happiness. It can also be a great experience for the horse. Maybe this becomes the horse's best home ever. Maybe it's a horse that's traded hands for a lot of reasons or been made to do things it didn't particularly enjoy. So when it goes wrong, that's just tragic. So that's what the book was about, was thinking about, is this something that you really want to do, or would you rather just dabble? Is it, if you do want to go about it, what might the preparation look like? How do you find the right horse? And then the second half of the book is a little bit more, I don't think I've used the word spiritual before describing it, but it is more cerebral, more spiritual, more about connection, communication, trust, leadership, that sort of thing.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
But I would like, you said something which made me think, but do you need to live in the countryside to have a place for the horse? Or how does it work? Do you have to buy a horse, or is it a horse with which several other people ride, or how is that organized?
Well, there are many, many ways of spending time with horses that vary from the, going to fall fairs and hanging out in the horse barns to owning your own horse. I'll start with your first question. I think it's quite a dream for people to be able to look out their kitchen window and see their horse on their own property. Not many of us can achieve that, and I haven't been able to achieve that. You will probably find it less expensive if you live in the country, and there are different kinds of boarding that usually have the terms, at least in North America, from full board to self-board. So with full board, you might not even go over and see your horse and it's still being looked after properly. With self-board, you're doing all or some of the work or sharing the chores with the other horse owners. So even if you own the horse fully, there are options about where you live and how it's taken care of, who does the work. I've always had self-board, which wasn't my first choice, but it ended up being a very good choice because I learned so much more and I got to spend time with people who knew more than I did. So that's at the owning end. There are also lease opportunities, and if someone is to the point where they think they would like, they've taken a few lessons maybe, or they used to be skilled as a child or a young adult and they want to get back into it, they could go to a barn where they have lots of horses, and it's quite possible that some of those horses will be available for lease, 1 day a week or half time or something like that, and they can see if there's a good fit. So, and then of course there's the occasional, well, a great example right now, I have a friend who rides my horse fairly often, and it's just an agreement we've worked out. It's good for her, it's good for my horse, it's good for me, and it's a more casual arrangement, although some people might say those things should be a formal lease. So lots of options for people.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, are you jealous then, or is the horse, does it divide the attention to several people? And
I think it depends a lot on the horse. I think when we're talking about older adults getting involved without a huge amount of experience, I think number one is a good, tolerant horse. Like my horse is a very tolerant horse. I remember I think it was the first time I rode her at Bluebird Lane Farm, where you hopefully saw the picture earlier. I was what was I trying to do? I think Lori was trying to get me to get her to curve to the right by putting a little bit of pressure on my right leg. I think that's, back then she'd say, do a half halt, do this, and I'd like, do a what? So my memory is a bit foggy on what we were trying to do. But Bocina felt me trying to do something, and she said, oh, do you mean like a half pass kind of thing, like, a leg yield? And she happily moved off to the left, like still with facing forward, but moving off to the, and Lori laughed because, it wasn't what I asked for at all, but she was, trying to help me out, right? And another time, after I had her out here and I was trying to get on her, mount her, get on the saddle in an area where there were no fences. So if she'd taken off, it would have been a problem. And I got unbalanced. I was rank amateur at this point, and I could just tell, oh yeah, I'm going to fall. Like it was right to that point where it was, uh-oh. And she braced, like she was walking forward, which she shouldn't have done. Had her neck all floppy, which she shouldn't have. She braced her neck so I could grab it and get back. And, she's a gem. So I think she loves it when somebody who's kind and cooperative comes and does something with her. There are other horses, who are probably a little bit too spunky and high end for beginners that might say, who the heck are you, and what do you think you're doing? And you're not doing anything right. And worst case scenario, you're leaving. So yeah. I think it's a lot like dogs, right? There are.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, because we had in June, I think, we had a session with a woman who talked about her dogs and what dogs can do for older people. Barbara Quick.
Yes, I was on that. I heard that call. Yeah. Yeah, and I saw a lot of parallels. Yeah, that was great. Because, dogs are different too, right? There are some dogs where if you went to visit people in their home, the dog would stay on guard the whole time and not want to have a relationship with you. And there are others, he's met you once before and he comes to the door wiggling because you've come to visit. So,
yeah. So my question is, what would be the decision or the point for making a decision from dogs going to horses? Or
so I missed part of your question of the point of the decision of
What's the big jump?
It's the big jump. Yeah. Why would you choose a dog, or why would you choose a horse? I mean, you are
Okay.
for horses, and so you know what your decision was.
I would say it's not an either or choice at all. You know, the choice might be, are you doing things together with a horse and a dog, or are they separate parts of your lives? Because in some situations with some dogs and some horses, they're great companions. They learn to really like each other. You go out for a ride on the trail and the dog's coming along with you. But that has another layer of learning too, because you want your dog to come back immediately if there's a reason, you know, if the dog starts to get aggressive with a cyclist or something. So I don't think it's either or. A horse is a big decision. I think anybody listening to this, anybody who cares about animals, doesn't take getting an animal lightly. You don't, you know, most of us, I would say, would not go and get a dog and have it for 6 months and think, oh, I'm too busy to keep a dog, let's get it. You know, I mean, it's a commitment. You want to do well by the animal. And a horse is a bigger commitment. I mean, for one thing, it's 1,000 pounds. And for another thing, it takes more space. And some people bring their horses in the house, but that's kind of weird. So,
and they live long too. Yeah.
They live a long time. Yeah. So, you know, I'm not going to try to answer that question in one call here, but I say research carefully, research yourself as well as the decision and as well as horses, and start off slow. You know, don't jump into buying a horse. You know, go for a trail ride with a reputable outfitter, take a lesson or two with a good coach and see if you like it. You know, hang out at the fall fair, go to workshops. And there are still benefits. You know, if you're self-aware of what you're trying to get out of it, there are still benefits.
And I think before doing that, I talk about me here, I would really come to terms with the fear of falling, and knowing, maybe even practice a little bit falling. I don't know. We are doing some balance exercises in Pilates, and I did a little bit Aikido, so falling is part of it. And I think I could try it, but there are many people who, getting older, getting more rigid, and then the fear of falling makes them fall, like my mother did, for instance. So probably we need a sort of psychological preparation to not be fearful, because when we are fearful, then things happen, no?
Yeah, I agree. And I think part of that preparation can simply be that, you know, as we've all done in our lives with whatever it might be, fear of spiders or, you know, whatever, just a gradual progression. And if you're, after visiting a horse at a riding barn for the 5th time, if you're ready to go and sit in the saddle, great. If you're ready to have someone lead you around in an enclosed area, great. You know, little baby steps. And because fear is with us for good reasons, right? You know, we can sense there's the possibility of something dangerous happening. And, you know, to be honest, I think most of us who have horses still experience fear. You know, sometimes with no reason. Like sometimes I'm just going to go out for a trail ride and I feel really anxious. You know, there's no reason to. I've got a great horse. You know, I've got lots of experience now for something like that. But, you know, that's where it comes back to that meditative stuff we spoke about earlier. If I'm feeling like that, I'll go right up by her face. I'll close my eyes. You know, I'll take several deep breaths. She'll take deep breaths, you know, and it's just kind of synergistic. We're both calm, we're both centered, and then I feel much better getting on.
And
But
this is definitely a difference between dogs and horses, because the dog doesn't breathe with you.
No, that's for sure.
It's very, very, very interesting. I'm wondering, we are about 10 minutes to the end. If you want to try again with a slideshow, and hopefully we stay on, and if not, then we say goodbye now, sort of.
Okay.
Well, actually, I had one question I wanted to ask.
Okay.
Yes. This is my childhood, and we young boys, we adolescent boys, that girls liked horses, I mean, we liked cars, but girls liked horses. And of course, we came up with all kinds of uninformed, ignorant reasons why they liked horses, and some of them were pretty vulgar. You've probably heard them sometimes. But what is it, girls and horses, as opposed to boys and horses?
I wish I had the answer for that. I talk about it in the book a little bit, but more as a series of questions. And one of the men who provided input to the book found that section of the book quite interesting. Actually, I've had a few men read it and find it interesting. They didn't have firm answers either, except one of them said, and he runs a lot of farm equipment and he's a bit of a mechanic as well as a horseman. He said there's kind of a lovely predictability about machinery. You've got control, you build the skills, and then, A plus B equals C. And that's nice sometimes. But he also appreciates horses. And originally I tried to figure out more of an answer to your question when I was doing the book. And I think maybe you have to be a man who likes horses to understand it. And I'm sure there's a whole bunch of variety, and some of it's like, usually the top competitors in most fields are men, or a lot. Well, I know I'll get criticized for saying that, but when you see men and horses, usually they're very skilled and doing something very well, like rounding up cattle or top dressage riders, or the international jumpers. So I think men are sometimes attracted to that high-end athletic skill stuff. Some women are too, but maybe it's a higher percentage of men and horses. But I was over at the barn where I self-board my horse the other day, and there was a guy there with an excavator doing some work for the new owners, and he asked me about my breed of horse, and I answered, and I said, well, if you'd like to go up and meet her, she's really friendly, feel free to do that at any time. And he said, oh, I was going to ask. He said, I really like horses. So I think there are a whole bunch of guys out there who really like horses, and they're just kind of under the radar. But I wish I understood it better. Yeah.
I can't help you. I'm sorry.
But you said at the beginning that men like machines, and when they do this high performance with horses, maybe that's an
kind of
idea.
machine.
Maybe they try to make it a sort of a machine, while women are often more interested in relationships.
Yeah, that's
Both
proven. I mean,
make relationship. No?
As you know, there's a ton of research about women and relationship focus, and yeah, you've probably thought about this too. Horses have meant different things at different times in our history. They've been for war, or they've been for agriculture, or, milk delivery, or, working the fields. And now it's getting to the point where a lot of horse-human relationships are about that, about communication and learning. So maybe we're just seeing more women involved now because of that. I don't know. I don't know if I should try the slides again, if you're going to put it up on the deck, but in case we tried them and they fall apart, I do want to mention a couple of slides that won't be self-evident for people just looking at the pictures. And one is a picture of Bernice Ende, who's a woman, I'm not sure of her age, but she's older than I am. And she has 2 Norwegian fjord horses, the same kind you've been seeing, because I'm partial to them. And somehow she got involved with big trips. I don't know how her story started with that, but she has been on many big trips. When I first became aware of her, she was coming back from an 8,000-mile trip over 2 years. 2 horses. One is a pack horse, one being ridden. She camps. Occasionally people invite her into their fields or whatever. She used to be a ballet teacher, I eventually learned. So, you know, fitness was part of her life. And she's still doing this. Amazing stories. And so, you know, some of her trips take her across North America, for example, or a big loop around North America back to her home. So you'll see an image of her with her 2 fjords. One of her fjords died after that image was taken, but she's got another one now that was given to her by a therapy barn. There's another slide that's called Surprises, and I shared a couple of surprises, one of which was writing the book. I had no idea I'd do that, so there's a picture of the book cover. But the other picture was taken by a woman who was touring Disney studios, and she just took this film because she was in Disney studios looking around at all these cool displays of how the movie Frozen was done. And so she put it up, a long series of coincidences, but eventually someone spotted the fact that there is a real horse and a real rider in the lower left of the picture you'll see. And that's Lori, the woman I bought my fjord from, riding a stallion who is my fjord's sire. Mm-hmm. And, you know, here, so here, my horse's dad was the, you know, visual inspiration for the horses in the Disney movie Frozen. You just never know what surprises are going to turn up. It might have nothing to do with fitness or health or, you know, but it might be fun. It might be a community connection. It might be a celebration, might be a success. And life gets full of surprises when you have a horse.
Also with cats and dogs, actually.
Yes. Yes. You learn about insurance and vet bills and
vet visits and so on.
Oh, yes.
Okay, shall we try? And in case we lose you again, we say goodbye already. And
okay, fabulous. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. I look forward to people asking me questions if they have some.
Yeah.
And we will
live
try.
Long and prosper.
Yes, I'm no longer showing that I can do that too. So
okay. We can see it.
You can see it? Okay. So hopefully you'll be able to see the next slide. This is Bernice. Are you able to see her?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so there she is. I think that was during the 8,000-mile trip that she took, and she's taken several of that sort of length. Amazing woman. And so when people are referencing this later, if they do, this is primarily from research by Dr. Alison Stout about the kinds of physical benefits and mental exercise as well that come from riding, even basic riding, not necessarily competitive work at all. Mm-hmm. There's in the lower left, I know it's not great on this slide, but that is a picture of a real horse with Lori riding it, my horse's sire, that inspired the artwork for that Disney film. Mm-hmm. And then, I'm just going to leave it with this slide. There are probably dozens of ways of getting involved, but, when you were talking about fear earlier, if you were volunteering at a place that looks after horses that were abandoned by people or neglected or abused, just working around the barn. I mean, it's most of us who have horses find that work quite pleasant, even although it's grubby. You might come home with muddy boots and broken fingernails, but it's good exercise, and you're helping. So don't feel like I'm saying to you, get a horse, but do feel like I'm saying to you, this can be a really interesting way of dabbling with experiences you haven't had and new learning and new benefits.
Mm-hmm. Good, wonderful.
Oh.
Is this the last one?
Yep. Well, I had some contact information on the last page, but that's, people already have my email from the thing that's now backwards on the tagline.
It's only backwards for you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it shows properly.
Yeah,
and it will be up on the website, I guess, as well. So
wisdomfactory.net, and then your name, Alice
MacGillivray.
MacGillivray.
It's difficult. If you want to spell it,
I think
pretty
there are,
obvious.
you see it here.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah,
Okay,
there are many spellings, and this is supposedly the original, but what would I know?
What name is this?
Scottish.
Scottish.
It's Scottish, yes.
Oh,
Yeah, it's my married name, so I can't claim a lot of Scottish heritage, but yes.
Anyway, people, if you are in Canada up there, go and visit Alice and get her advice. Where to go, where to find a horse, and so on. And she showed a lot of that here, but I'm quite sure if they get in contact with you, first of all, by her book, you know, and second of all, get in contact with her and get inspiration to do it yourself. I don't know, we here in Italy, if we have these possibilities, but I certainly will look around. You know, we have some stables, but if they have this sort of
I think it's a different social class here that has
I
horses.
guess so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like
Maybe.
Italians go golfing, but we couldn't afford it.
We will see.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, and thank you
Thank you.
everybody who has watched and who will watch in the future. I hope you enjoy it and
Hey.
try it. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. And then saying to our viewers, we will stop now for this year, the Conscious Agencies, and we will start again in February 8th.
February 8th.
For other 5 or 6 episodes. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye-bye,
Thank you,
Alice.
Heidi.
Oh,
Bye,
thank
everyone.
you, Alice. It's great.